So far we only have two different cabinet material schedules. We have a cherry with pre-finished UV and a cherry with cherry interiors. And we haven't really talked about setting up different construction methods a whole lot yet either, but at this time I want to talk about the difference between our face frame and our frameless material schedules. So best case scenario is you can somehow find a way to utilize this same cherry / pre-finished UV on face frame as we do for frameless. And the amount of people that I've seen actually be able to do this is pretty slim. Now I am a big fan of trying to use the same materials for as many things as we can, so like I said, if you can find a way to use the same material schedules, great. But very few people are actually able to do that. You know, some people might use 1/2 inch sides on face frame and 3/4 on frameless. And so inevitably, you just need to create different schedules. So let's look at how we should handle that. I'm going to assume that there is a difference in our face frame and our frameless schedules for this video. So the first thing we need to do is we need to name this so it sorts appropriately. So I like to find something to prefix all of our frameless and all of our face frame. So I'm going to just do Euro for my frameless. And then I'll copy these and I'll do FF for my face frame. And the reason I like to put a prefix is because it sorts alphabetically. Obviously, here it sorts alphabetically, but more importantly, when your salespeople or your designers go to start a new job, it also sorts alphabetically here. So that's why I like to do a prefix, and obviously you can use whatever word or whatever abbreviation you would like, whether it's frameless or Euro. I would try to keep it short because the material names themselves do get pretty long. So if you can find a letter abbreviation, that's best. Now, if I go into my face frame material schedule, like I mentioned with the unfinished left ends, now I could change this to 1/2 inch pre-finished UV without impacting my frameless schedules. And like I said, for most of you, if you are building both face frame and frameless, you probably will need to create two separate ones. If you're only building frameless or you're only building face frame, congratulations, you can have a shorter list. So one of the most common things you'll do in Cabinet Vision is add new materials and add new material schedules. I like to use what I call the template method. And for me, my template has always been cherry. If you'd rather use a different species or actually create a material schedule called template, you're more than welcome to, but I just know that when I add a new species, whether it be cedar or walnut or whatever it may be, I just know that I'm going to copy from cherry, rename it, and replace everywhere that I see cherry with my new species. And this helps eliminate just errors and not knowing where things are coming from. You'll find it's a lot more consistent if you always copy from the same thing. Now there are some variations when you may not want to do this. If it's more of a panel product, you're wanting to create like Egger or Northern Contours or some brand like that, it may make more sense to copy from one that's similar to that rather than cherry. But you'll find that the more you can find templates and the more you can always copy from the same thing, the better off you'll be and the more consistent your material schedules will be, because you want to try to avoid troubleshooting every single schedule as much as possible. So in this example, let's just assume that we wanted to add cedar. Well, we have to determine, okay, do I want this in face frame and frameless? And if I do, then I would need to copy all 4 of these options and rename them to cedar. So let's look at what that would look like. I would start with my Euro, copy this, and anywhere I see cherry, I replace with cedar. And then it always puts this copy of that we want to get rid of, and make sure you get rid of spaces at the beginning because that is annoying when there's an extra space at the beginning. So now we have cedar, and then I could copy this and make cedar cedar, but because I always use cherry as my template, I'd want to go to cherry cherry and then call this cedar cedar. And the reason for that being, even though part of these would be correct, I don't want to have to mentally think, okay, wait, what do I use whenever I'm doing finished interior? I would rather copy from the finished interior version of cherry that I have set up correctly, and then it becomes a simple, if I see cherry, I replace it with a matching version of cedar, rather than trying to think about, okay, if I do finished interior, what material do I use on my shelves? You know, what do I use on my back? So you'll find the more that you can utilize that template option, the easier it will be. And notice how alphabetically, like my cedar is going to group together, and then my cherry will group together. And this is important because, especially if you have different interiors, And that's why interior needs to be second here. Because if you do cedar with white melamine interiors or cedar with walnut interiors, everything just stays together because it's alphabetical. Now, if I wanted to continue my template method, I would also come down here to face frame and copy it. And then I would copy the face frame finished interior and name this cedar. So the first 1 or 2 times you do this, you might get confused and get a little turned around. I would recommend just make a backup. And as long as you're always copying, it's easy to delete and restart. But once you get a couple of these under your belt, it becomes just second nature to just create materials and create new material schedules. So now you can see we have a frameless and a face frame. And my recommendation is, if you're just starting out, don't go create 100 different material schedules. Focus on getting one template. In my case, cherry. For you, it can be whatever is most common for you. But focus on getting that schedule perfect before you go copy and make a whole bunch of different schedules. Because there's no point in setting up all 100 of these and then a week later you discover that you actually wanted to use a different material on all the finished ends. So you can save a little bit of work if you focus on getting the first one right before you start building out all of them. Now, obviously, we're not done with these because if I look at my actual schedule, I still have cherry everywhere. And I don't have any cedar materials created yet. But once I would simply select cedar from my little search. And then everywhere I saw cherry, if it's 3/4 two-sided, I would replace with a 3/4 two-sided cedar. Or if it's 1/4 inch one-sided, I would go find a 1/4 inch one-sided cedar and replace it. And that's the beauty of this template method. It becomes so easy to just copy it, recognize where cherry is, replace it with whatever the relevant material is in the cedar version. So even though we just started with our catalog, you can probably already start to imagine just how long this list is going to get. Because in the last video, we created a separate schedule for Euro and for face frame. Every time we add a new species, it's going to add 4. It's going to be 2 for Euro and 2 for face frame. And so this video is going to be all about how can we reduce this as much as possible. Obviously, if we can get it down to 2 for every species, that's great. But if you build your face frame and your frameless different, we have to have 4. And so let's talk about some of the other situations where this might happen. Because I've already logged into people's computers and, they create a different one for base and uppers and face frame and frameless and sometimes even different back thicknesses. And pretty soon you start having 8 to 10 different material schedules for every species. And so when you go to add a new species, you have to copy so many things. So this video is all going to be all about making the decision whether it needs to be a new material schedule or if we can find a way to just do it at the job level or find a way to automate it. So the first consideration we need to think about whenever we have a situation come up is this a one-off situation or even is it just going to happen once or twice? Because if it is, I would highly consider just doing it at the job level. Going into the room details, modifying for this room, and just, say they want 3/4 backs instead of 1/4 inch backs. If it's just going to be once or twice, there's no reason to copy the main system material schedule for every species just because they want it at one time. Now, if one of your contractors that you do 5 jobs a month for wants to do 3/4 backs, then you have to start thinking about, okay, I either have to duplicate my material schedules or I have to come up with a solution that can remap to a part that's using the right material. And so there are a lot of different strategies to avoid extra schedules. And this video is more about thinking about if it should be a new material schedule or deciding if there's a way to automate it. So in the case of the 3/4 backs and the 1/4 inch backs, it might be as simple as, rather than copying and creating 2 new schedules for every species, maybe I can just go back to the part library and create a new part called thicker unfinished back and then have a UCS to replace it whenever we're using that guy's construction method. And so I'm not going to cover all the specifics of the UCS part of in this video, but I do want you to think about before you go and start making a whole lot of duplicates, whether it's a difference between base and wall or whether it's you do nailers of this material sometimes and of this material another time, or if you use thicker backs on certain constructions. Before you start making a ton of different duplicates, just know that there's probably a way to do it smarter. In the last section on a deeper look at materials, we created a few pool materials. We made a black and a silver and a brass color. So now let's look at how we can create a schedule and control some of the settings on that. So I'm going to go to material schedules and go to pool. And the very first thing I'm going to do is delete, because I love to delete things. So I'm going to delete brass knob, chrome pool. and get rid of everything other than no pools and no knobs. Okay, now let's create a new one, and let's call it, and let's go to my pool section, and we have knob silver, and this is going to be all knobs. So I'll copy this, and let's do knob black. So you can see I have to create one for each color, but it's pretty quick to replace. Knob, I'll call it bronze. This could be brass or a few different names, but okay. Now this is meaning knobs on all of my pools, doors, drawers, and finger pool, which finger pool is not really going to apply. I would actually probably recommend removing that. That's more for a built-in if you want to put a pool like on the top edge of the door. So I wouldn't want to use a knob in that case. So we can just right click and remove it. I could have saved a little time if I'd done that on the first one before I copied, but this is all fine. Okay, so this is all knobs. Now, what if we want knobs on the doors and bar pools on the drawers? Well, let's copy our material schedule and let's call it knob pool and then put the color behind. And this time I find the silver 4-inch pool. There we go. And then I can copy this and call it knob pool black. And I'll grab the black 4-inch pool. And then one more, let's make a bronze. Okay, there we go. And let's do one more set of options. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to say pool silver. And this is going to be all pools and no knobs. And then I'll make a pool black. And a pool bronze. Okay, now there's one other setting I want to direct your attention to. There's a rotate door pool and a rotate drawer pool. And right now every one of these are no, which I'm going to leave it like that and we're going to go into a job and see how this looks. Okay, I'm going to start by going to hardware and choosing just a black knob. And I'm going to set up just a couple cabinets. I'm going to put a 3-drawer beside this one. And then we'll put a wall cabinet above. Okay, so you can see the knobs are easy enough. They're just centering on the drawers, and then they're using that horizontal offset that we set up back in the material library. Now I mentioned you can change this at the job. So if I go to properties and pools, remember I set it to that 1.25" default, but I could randomly change it if I needed to for a certain door. Now if you wanted to change it for the whole job, I would consider going back to the material library and changing it there. Okay, so knobs are easy enough. There's really no rotate settings that we need to worry about. Now let's choose knob/pool. There we go. So now we have the 4-inch pool on our drawers and we have knobs on our doors. And now let's choose all pools. And there we go. So now what does that rotate pool do? Let's look what happens if I choose the rotate on the door option. So I'm going to just use a little hack here to go to the pool schedule and modify for this room. And I'm going to click rotate door pool. And now they're flat. So you can see what that button does, and obviously rotate drawer pool would put it vertical, which I don't want in this case. But that's how we can quickly create some options to be able to visually show where the pools are. To my knob/pool, and there we go. So like I said, you will have to create a new pool schedule for every different color you want, every different size. You know, if you have a 4-inch or a 5 7/16 or an 8-inch pool. And you'll also have to create one for every combination, like if it's all knobs or if it's all pools or if it's a mix. So again, try to simplify as much as possible, but even just with the few options we have here, we have a pretty usable. We can replicate a lot of different looks here with just these that we made. Now, if you wanted to put sizes, I would probably put knob 4-inch pull in the description so you can tell it apart. So we still haven't created any hinge material schedules, so it's still using all these default options. And in the last section on the deeper look at materials, we actually created some new hinge materials. If I go into my hardware and hinge, you can see we set up for inset, frameless, and 1/2-inch overlay. So let's look at how this might look in our material schedules. Because again, just creating the materials doesn't mean we can use them on a job. It's the material schedules that tell Cabinet Vision how and when to use those materials. So let's go to hinge, and like we do, let's delete everything except the 110 euro. I'm actually going to hang on to the inset as well. So rather than 110 euro, I'm just going to name this frameless. And the description doesn't really show anywhere, but I'm just going to clear it out. Okay, now if I go to my hinge options, I have inset and the double door hinge. So on all of these, we have a regular inset hinge, and then if it's a double door, it uses the inset double door. And then I got my hinge plate set up as inset with boring. And remember I gave the example, you could do a hinge plate with no boring or a hinge plate with boring. And if I would make a separate schedule, this would be an easy toggle at the room level or at the cabinet level on if I want the hinge plates to bore. I'm going to assume that we do, so I'm going to just use the material called with boring and not create a separate one. If you wanted to be able to toggle it at the job level, you would need to make a inset with boring or an inset without boring here as well. Now there's also potential to have a UCS that turns it on and off if you need that cabinet level or room level control, but the material schedules is just kind of the easy way to make that toggle. Okay, as you can see, this looks pretty good. And my frameless, it's using the frameless hinge. Now I don't like that it's using the 45 corner. I want it to just use my regular frameless hinge. Frameless double door hinge, that's perfect. And then the same hinge plate with boring. So I'm okay with sharing hinge plates across multiple, whether it's inset or frameless or 1/2-inch overlay. A lot of times you can use kind of the same hinge plate regardless. But obviously we saw how to create those, or if it's a different style of hinge plate, obviously you could replace that here. Okay, now let's copy inset and do 1/2-inch overlay. And then everywhere we see inset, we replace with 1/2-inch overlay. So now when I start a new job and go to hardware, now I have a way to put those new hinge materials to use. In this video, we're going to talk about countertop schedules. And I do not have the countertop module. I can still show them visually and look at them in a job, but I can't actually really control a whole lot of details as far as how they're constructed. And technically, I don't even really have to bother with assigning a material because I can still, even with material not assigned like I have it, it will still show visually and technically it would work just fine. But how I like to do it is let's create, a quartz and maybe a granite, and you could even do cultured marble. And it's more just so you have a drop down to select, and if you want to show it on the title block or whatever, this is optional. You could just do stone or countertop and just use it for everything. Because like I said, without the countertop module, it's all controlled at the 3D level with whatever texture is assigned to it. It's really not going to be looking at the material. So let's go back to our material library, and I'll go to other, and there's not currently a countertop section, so I'm just going to click create group, and I'll name it countertop. And you can see there's currently a countertop material and it's just miscellaneous. And like I said, we could just use that and create one schedule called countertop. Now, for my case, I'm going to create a separate one for quartz, granite, and then I'll do a cultured marble. So I'm just going to call it miscellaneous because this material is not actually going to do anything. So I'm going to do quartz countertops, and I'll copy this and do granite countertops. And I'll copy this and do cultured marble. We can't assign textures or finishes or anything to a miscellaneous type, which is good, but we can put some costing on if we want to. But again, at such a generic or high level category, it wouldn't really be beneficial. Let's go back to our material schedules, go to countertop, and let's assign these materials. I put it in the other category and in countertop. So I'll just apply quartz to everything. Technically, the only thing I really need without the countertop module is this countertop surface, but I'll apply everything here just in case. And then we'll just copy this and call it granite. And we'll copy that and call it cultured marble. Okay, let's go into a job and see how this works. If I go to the countertop section, you can see my 3 options here. I'll just leave it on quartz for now. And I'll just put 2 cabinets together. Go to plan and auto build my countertops. It's telling me countertops layer is not visible. Let's switch back to the shop drawing, and now I can auto build my tops. Okay, so important to note, what I just added is not going to change at all how this functions. Whether I'm on quartz or granite, it's the same thing. The only reason I would suggest possibly adding those categories is if you want to automatically pull in the countertop type into your room details. If you don't care about that, there's really no point in building out a lot of countertop schedules because we're not machining them, it's visual only, and the schedule isn't controlling the thickness of the top anyways. Without the countertop module, everything is controlled by this layout section. And like I said, it's not affecting what kind of materials we can get rid of that last section.